Hi, my name is Sarah, and today I'm going to be talking about the Latinx vulnerabilities in human trafficking. My area or my chosen career path after I graduate from Portland State is going to be in social work. I am planning on getting my master's in macro level social work and also minoring in Chicano Latino studies. So this question, I feel like this accurately represents the populations that I have been working with in the anti-trafficking field for the last 3 years. And also, I'm hoping to use my education and degree as a social worker to kind of just keep further serving the populations that I'm working with. So my question for this project is, what are the risk factors that make Latinx individuals more vulnerable to human trafficking, both sex and labor? And what are the barriers in addressing the issue? So, what is human trafficking? I feel like this is a subject that a lot of people don't quite understand. I think a lot of people think that human trafficking is people just getting kidnapped off the side of the street, being forced into a van, and then being forced into sexual slavery. Kidnapping is actually only about 3% of human trafficking cases in the United States. Um, and really, a lot of traffickers are someone that the victim knows or comes into contact with and is kind of slowly groomed and manipulated over a period of time. So I can read just a quick definition of the legal definition of human trafficking. Um, the legal definitions for sex and labor trafficking are a little bit wordy and can make it sometimes hard to understand, so I'm just going to read a condensed version. Human trafficking is a crime involving the exploitation of a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. So what that looks like is people are being exploited for these things. And the trafficking comes into the equation where there is the element of force, fraud, or coercion, and there also needs to be an exchange of something of value. So, what that looks like for sex trafficking is that a trafficker can coerce an individual into performing a sex act, and then that trafficker is then getting paid for that sex act. And it is against that person's will that they are participating in it. With labor trafficking, a lot of times what we see is someone maybe feeling like they don't have a lot of options. We see this a lot with Latinx immigrants. They don't have a lot of options for work and will believe someone when they say, oh, you can come and work for me, like on my farm, for example, and I will provide like housing, I'll pay you, you'll get fed. And so that person ends up going into this employment situation under fraudulent means, and they end up having terrible living conditions. They're either getting paid very little or not at all, and are often just treated very, very horribly. A trafficker will also often hold someone's documents, so they'll take their passport and that person won't have access to it. And especially if it's an immigrant, a lot of times a trafficker will use the fear of deportation in order to kind of coerce that person into staying. Forced criminality can kind of encompass both sex and labor trafficking. There's a lot of overlap between all of this. So what forced criminality can look like is a trafficker can force someone to steal something from a store or sell drugs or even recruit other victims to be trafficked as well. And a lot of times that trafficker has so much power and manipulation over individuals that they will end up doing things that they don't want to do because they're scared and they feel like they don't have any other options. So there's a lot of myths around what trafficking is, and I think that the more people understand it, the more likely they are to identify it and maybe identify it in someone else or themselves, and then they're able to get help. When we look at sex trafficking, um, this information here is specifically for Latinx individuals. And while it says here thousands of women and girls from Mexico, Central America, and the US, I do want to point out that trafficking, both sex and labor trafficking, also happen to males. It's not just strictly females. We have more data on women, and victims usually are women. There's way more victims who are women than men. But right now, this particular graph is just looking at women and girls. And here you can see 35% are from Mexico, 24% are from all of Central America, and then we have other populations down here. This 35% here for Mexico, in Central Oregon, the organization that I work for, many, if like, I want to say about 95% of the immigrants, the Latinx immigrants that we work with, and not even just immigrants, but like people of color, like anyone who isn't a white US citizen, is from Mexico. We do have some other clients who are like from Venezuela, and a couple of other countries, but they are primarily from Mexico. At-risk populations for labor trafficking. Um, Here we see it's primarily males. 86% of labor trafficking victims are males. We also have female, right here's reporting 0% gender minorities. And I will say, with the data that is available on trafficking victims, there's a lot of cases that go unreported. So while this is like what we mostly see, I feel like the bigger picture, it's often a lot worse than you would think. This just kind of gives an idea of like the populations that are at risk, and all of this is also regarding Latinx individuals. The vulnerabilities for Latinx individuals in particular, something that makes people more vulnerable to being trafficked, language access is a big one. Fear of deportation, like I mentioned before, traffickers will use that fear of that person being deported to coerce them into doing things. Um, Uncertain futures, even if someone comes to this country legally or illegally, and is really like wanting to make a better life and get a job, like sometimes there's not always as many opportunities, especially if you're an illegal immigrant. So traffickers will often take advantage of that and offer situations that might sound really good. And then once someone gets kind of like tricked into a trafficking situation, it makes it harder to get out. Not understanding rights is also a very big one. Um, Someone who comes to this country, and I don't want to just focus on immigrants specifically. I think Latinx individuals just in general have a lot of vulnerabilities. But the language access kind of plays into not understanding rights. If you don't understand your rights, you don't know that there's help out there. You don't have to be in this situation. Sometimes you might not realize that, like, people aren't allowed to do these things to you. And again, lack of opportunities. If you are not a citizen and are trying to make a life for yourself here, you might feel like your only opportunity is to stay in a trafficking situation. The barriers to service are actually very, very similar to the vulnerabilities. So barriers to service, even if someone is willing to get out of their trafficking situation, there is it's difficult to find culturally appropriate services, and that includes language access. A lot of organizations that I've kind of worked with, and even within the organization that I work for, we only have two Spanish speakers, and we do have access to Language Line, which is a service that provides interpretation for people, but it is still very, very difficult. There's not enough people in these roles that speak Spanish and are able to connect with the amount of clients that we need to serve. There's also not a lot of funding for services. Even in grant cycles where we have like more funding than usual, the biggest thing that I've seen, at least in my own experience, is a lot of our grants only have funding for US citizens. So there's this very large population that's not being served that really needs services, the Latinx population. And there are some things that we can do, and we can still kind of figure out situations and make things work, but there is definitely not enough funding. The fear of retaliation and violence and deportation, that also plays into barriers to services. People don't want to reach out for help if they think that they're going to be hurt, their family members are going to be hurt, or they're going to get deported. And I think also the lack of information. Like I said earlier in my slides, a lot of people don't understand what trafficking is, and they don't understand that there is help out there. Working towards a solution. There are, while it's very frustrating, just feeling like there aren't enough services and not enough culturally appropriate services for Latinx individuals, there are organizations that are doing a lot of great work. Policy work is an area of social work that I'm still trying to understand and am really wanting to learn more about, especially when it comes to national policy around immigration and trafficking specifically. There is, I believe, Polaris Project. They're a nonprofit, but they have a lot of really, really great information and have kind of led the fight in human trafficking along with an organization called Freedom Network. And both of these organizations have a lot of really great information specifically for Latinx individuals regarding immigration and just what resources are out there. There's also a lot of people doing a lot of advocacy work, just one-on-one. I know here in Central Oregon, we have the Latino Community Association. We partner with them a lot and do what we can to try and help people who are in these situations. When it comes to citizenships and visas, I feel like that is an area that, again, it just can be really complicated. I know T visas and U visas are a thing, and this is where the organization that I work for specifically doesn't have a role to help with this. So we refer most of our clients to ERCO in Portland, and they help with citizenships and visas and trying to help people who are trafficked gain citizenship and just keep them from feeling like they have to go back into their trafficking situation. Immigration reform, it's a really big one. I put this in here because of everything that we've been learning in this class and just seeing how immigrants are so much more vulnerable and have been exploited over over just the last 3 years that I've been working in the anti-trafficking field. I've seen a very big uptick in referrals for Latinx immigrants. And like I said earlier, education, I think that is just one of the biggest things that we can do is educate people on what trafficking is, especially educating Latinx individuals, Latinx population. Having resources available in Spanish, I think is very, very, very important. And yeah, I definitely plan to take what I've learned in this class and what I'm learning at Portland State and just keep applying it to the work that I'm doing and hopefully see things start to improve. Here I just added a couple of resources for individuals who have experienced trafficking. Anyone can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline or text it. They do have Spanish speakers available. ERCO, like I mentioned before, Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, also partners with local trafficking agencies. And then the organization I work for, the Anti-Trafficking Project in Central Oregon. Anyone in Oregon can call us. Anyone even outside of Oregon, if someone happens to get our number, we will never turn someone away. We do have Spanish speakers, and like I said, we do have a couple of people that work in our organization who speak Spanish and can help. And we have access to language line as well. So if someone calls from like all the way across the country, needs help, we will help get them connected to a local resource in their area. And yeah, that is all I have. Thank you so much for your time. And that's it.